Hello and welcome to an Infinity the Game battle report. In this game, we are playing Caledonian Highlanders versus White Company in the custom scenario Skyfall. Now, as a bit of background, Skyfall is a scenario that I came across through Operation Hungry Walrus, which is an online global campaign being run by A Tale of Miniatures and Dice, which is, as the name might suggest, it's an online global campaign. It's a lot like the on-tabletop global campaigns that are run officially by Corvus Belli, but because it's unofficial, I get kind of a more casual vibe. I know a few people in Australia who are playing in it, and I generally get a pretty impressive feeling from it. The production value is nice and high, it looks fun, the attitude seems to be like good and casual, and it doesn't seem to have any of that intense sweatiness that has been accompanied in the past by the official Infinity Global campaigns, where you have people that are really, really into it and really serious, and it's all just a bit fucking intense. So they have a bunch of custom scenarios that are associated with different areas in the campaign, in the same way as the on-tabletop campaigns run. And this one is by Francesco Buccino, and it's called Skyfall. And it's from the OP at Home Create Your Mission contest, and it leapt out to me as really, really interesting. Now, I'm not going to scroll through and describe the entire scenario, I will describe it as we go through play, but I think it did a couple of things successfully that are really hard to do just with scenarios in wargames generally, which is really impressive for a custom scenario just designed by someone at home, and I really wanted to play it. I will play this again probably. Might be a few changes that I would make. I'll talk about that at the end, but only a very small number of things. Overall, really interesting, and we'll get into why as we're playing the game. So this is the Caledonian list that I wanted to play for this. This is not tailored particularly for the mission, but I've been thinking about Caledonia a little bit since I did the tier list recently, and just that they've always seemed like they're kind of good, and they've been good when I played them in the past, and I wanted to play them again. So there is like 15% meme going on here, which you'll see as we get through it, but with the exception of the meme plays, this is kind of what I would consider a modern Caledonian list to look like. So what have we got? Well, to start with, we have 4 Highlander Greys, which are just exceptional heavy infantry. They are well statted. They're not true 2 wound infantry, they're dogged heavy infantry, which is not quite the same, but you can't argue about that for the cost. They have smoke grenades, they have +1 attack ballistic skill attacks, so they've got damage 16 HMGs, damage 14, damage 15 T2 boarding shotguns. They're all packing smoke grenades, they've got OKCC, they're dogged, they're armor 3, like 20 points for that boarding shotgun decharge, CC21 Highlander Grey, nothing wrong with that. So these are running in 2 teams, 1 team of 4 and 1 team of 3. Team of 4 is a HMG and a T2 Highlander Grey, a paramedic volunteer, and Isabel. Now to note, the paramedic is there basically for mission coverage, not to recover the Highlander Greys. They are often going to go dogged and then die, but I do have quite a few Cameronians and SAS in this list, and I will try and recover them if I can. So in that note, the second Highlander Grey team is pretty similar, HMG, T2 boarding shotgun, and a volunteer. Now, normally I would split these kind of teams, this 4-trooper team and this 3-trooper team across combat group slots, but because this is a William Wallace list, I haven't done that. The rest of this combat group is a Cameronian, an SAS forward observer, and a tractor mule Katyusha. And okay, we've got Isabel McGregor, we've got at least 1 forward observer. In comes the tractor mule. This is something I like to do in Ariadna, mostly for synergy with the SAS. So when those SAS are moving up the field, being able to just cross gaps where your opponent has 1 ARO, and if your opponent goes, well, it's probably an SAS, I will just discover, being able to respond with forward observe and then missile them, even from, like a Katyusha is not a powerful missile, but it's powerful enough, and it costs 9 points. And that feels like something to me that is worth like the 9 point and the troop slot to make those SAS forward observers kind of like actually a bit of a threat. And we have in this list Isabel McGregor, and we also have a war driver. The war driver is only 14 points in 1 SWC, it has a boarding shotgun, that's totally fine, and it means that this list just randomly has 2 hackers. Like, yeah, they're not that high whip, but it has 2 hackers, so I can do some spotlighting in ARO. And Ariadna classically does not have hacking AROs. The fact that this list could feasibly no-sell like a robot attack means that it has a genuine defense against one of the like few attack pieces that otherwise can really punch through Ariadna. The rest of this combat group is Wallace, 2 Cameronians, and an SAS. So that means this list is running full availability of Dog Warriors with 3 20-point Cameronians. Now, some things that are notably absent from this list. No Usha McNeil, and no McMurray. McMurray is 7 points more than a Cameronian, and I'm going to be using these guys really aggressively. McMurray is excellent, should probably be in the list. McGregor is excellent, should probably be in the list. But by trimming those down to SAS and a Cameronian respectively, I freed up like 14 points, and that affords you a lot. But realistically, like one of these 20-point Highlander Greys could just become a 6-point volunteer without really seriously reducing the power of the list to afford those upgrades. So that is something I would seriously consider. This Cameronian could become Walrus, one of these SAS could become Yushi McNeil, and the list is probably slightly stronger overall. But otherwise, the list is planning on using Wallace to its full effect. I'm going to use a lot of coordinated orders through Wallace's inspiring leadership. I've got probably just enough gun. I think I would maybe like one more long-range weapon, but there is a little bit of a dearth of them that I think are good in Caledonia, so we're just going to rely on the Highlander Greys and hope that's basically enough. So this is my opponent's White Company list, and I will say White Company is probably the worst possible matchup for this Caledonian list that I wanted to play. I have 8 models with really good smoke grenades. Like, I am planning on launching close assaults, and you can't stop me. Unless you got MSV2 arrows, and this list has 2 of them. So that really sucked. We had to go pretty hard in this scenario to overcome that. But I do like this list. There are some tweaks my opponent and I discussed after the game, but the core of this is really, really solid. We've got a Fusilier core, so there's Fusilier, Decoy Lieutenant, and then Lieutenant itself, with a Hideout MSV2. So no Kahu in this list. I'm not even sure if you can have a Kahu in White Company. The links are a little bit, they're good, but a little bit weird. But Hideout, totally excellent, nothing wrong with that, and it's an MSV2 ARO piece with smoke that it can smoke shoot through. We round that link out with a paramedic and a hacking device. Now, I actually think you could probably pretty easily cut the paramedic and maybe even the hacking device. Sixth Sense is nice on the hideout, but not essential. But the 2 extra Fusiliers don't go that far in terms of making this link actually good. I think the hacker gives you a Sixth Sense hacker and Sixth Sense on the MSV. That's probably worthwhile, but you do not actually need a paramedic in this list. You are very, very rarely going to be trying to paramedic that hideout because you can't reroll. It's going to be a no wounding cap. It's just fight until it's dead. So I think you could go down to 4 troops and have maybe, say, this paramedic be a Varangian guard. Otherwise, we have a Danavis, we have a Tiger Soldier, and that's going to be quite relevant in this mission. It will do very well. Bulleteer Heavy Shotgun, that should almost certainly be Liang Kai, to be honest. It will do well, but it should absolutely be Liang Kai. Then we have a Varangian, then a Guilang Mine Layer. Guilang, for me, are probably my least favorite troop that I think everyone else thinks is good. There is nothing wrong with this kit. It's the fact that it costs 27 points, and it costs 27 points because it's whip 14, because it has an MSV1, etc. This is too much. This price cost is too much for what a Guilang does, but they are popular and it would be totally fine this game. We then have a Beast Hunter FTO, a Kahu, and a Kaplan, and this is an excellent link team. It has a Specialist, it has a Kahu, it has a Doctor to recover the Kahu, and it has a Beast Hunter Mine Layer. Excellent. We then have a Peacemaker and a Clipper, and the Clipper I like. I don't love including Clippers in lists that only have one hacker, because it's just a little too easy to have the one hacker go down and the Clipper is a bit useless. But in this list, there are 2 hackers because we have that Fusilier. So totally good to have the Clipper alongside the Peacemaker. Very few deployment zone repeater network pieces, but you do have the Guilang Mine Layer deployable repeater and the Peacemaker. So yeah, excellent. Guided missile threat, excellent. Good, just good, well-rounded list. Couple of pieces that should probably go in. Lang Kai, maybe another Varangian, but generally very good list. So here we are on the table, and at this point, let's talk about how Skyfall works. So Skyfall does something very interesting in that it manages to, I think, pretty successfully actually have multi-phase scenario play, which is something that in like a 3-round format like Infinity is very difficult. So this is how the scenario works. To start with, there are 2 antennas on the table. They're in there. These need to be connected and controlled. We actually played this differently. I think controlled is something that you do not want in this scenario. So we played these as these need to be connected, just like any other antenna. And while they are connected, they will give you a bonus to something that's going to happen at the end of the first round. Otherwise, you also need to nominate an engineer or a hacker in your list to be your flight controller. They will also give you a bonus. So what happens? Okay, so in the first round, you are looking to activate these consoles and kill your opponent's flight controller while preserving your own. Then at the end of the first round, 4 panoplies are going to combat drop using the explode special rule onto the table. And these are going to land in locations determined by the players, making a face-to-face roll modified by whether or not your flight controller is still alive and how many of the objectives you control. Once the panoplies land, the actual scoring is 1 point for each controlled panoply, 2 points for controlling more than your opponent, 2 points if your opponent controls none, 1 point for pulling more things out of the panoplies, and 1 point for doing one classified objective. And so I really like this as a concept. I really like the idea of trying to do things on first turn that shape the battlefield, that then present emergent gameplay. Like the game will play very differently each time players play it because the table will force different landing locations, the position of your troops will force different landing locations. Panoplies can't be landed within 8 inches of each other, which I think helps split them up. And it felt really cool. It's really difficult to balance scenarios where the players choose where the panoplies where objectives go. And I think having the first turn contest followed by the face-to-face rolls to place the panoplies, followed by then actually having to fight over them, is a really cool flow to the scenario that had a good chance of working out well. Otherwise, to note, the scenario is designated a landing area, and because it's got a hacker and an engineer bonus, so I was pretty happy with the fact that I had included 2 hackers in my list. We have 16-inch deployment zones, and I won the lieutenant role because Wallace has quite high lieutenant, that has quite a high willpower score, and after a little bit of thinking, I chose to go first. The scenario has a fair bit of second turn impetus. It's all end of game scoring, which normally would not incentivize me to go second, but it's not just end of game scoring because there is an end of round one second player advantage trying to press those buttons, which is a really interesting dichotomy because if you think about a scenario like Supremacy, where it's end of round one, end of round two, end of round three, there are 3 points of advantage for the player going second. I will, not always, but relatively often, elect deployment in the hopes of getting second turn in those scenarios. By comparison, if you compare a scenario where it is all end of game scoring, I am much more likely to go first because I will have 3 turns to punch my opponent. It's only scenarios like supplies. Supplies are a good example, where in supplies it's end of game scoring, but you have to do lots of work over the course of the scenario that I think you have really interesting choices about whether or not you want to go first or want to go second, deployment, etc. And I think this scenario, Skyfall, might just about straddle the line between the two as well. However, I have a rule of thumb in 16-inch deployment zones, which is go first, because it is just really easy to attack in 16-inch deployment zones. I think they should be pretty rare, to be perfectly honest, but I had the opportunity, I won the role, so I elected to go first. I then spent a command token to do an extra reserve, and we'll go through what my deployments are now. So what we have here is we have 2 teams. On the left, we have our paramedic, boarding shotgun, and then HMG Highlander Grey. And then we have over here, we have boarding shotgun, HMG Highlander Grey, Isabel Burger, and a paramedic. Now this team here, this little blob of 3 people, never ever deploy like that unless you are absolutely sure it was going to be safe. I spent a good 2 or 3 minutes checking all of the angles from my opponent's deployment zone to make sure that they weren't going to get completely screwed there. My opponent almost elected to over-infiltrate a Guilang just to punish them, but in the end decided not to, and I'm really glad that he did, because that could have really, really rooted the game if he'd made that play. Otherwise, I deployed my primary combat group, Caledonian here. We've got big robot Caledonians, don't ask questions. The Katyusha is in the back there, and then we have William Wallace hanging out here. There are 2 reserve drops, which will be 2 Cameronians, and we have one of the SAS here, and the other here on the roof. That's a long way up, but this red spot here is a doorway, which will take me down to there, so it's pretty easy access to different parts of the table if I want to. My opponent, for his part, you can't see it super well here. The picture is a little bit cut off. But what we have is, in this space here, we have the hideout. And the hideout has a really long line sort of to here and to here. But there's a little bit of a blind spot kind of in this space there that I will be able to exploit. Otherwise, on this rooftop, we have the hacker, and then the Guilang will deploy there and place its deployable repeater here. So the Guilang is hanging back a little bit, but then the deployable repeater will have a nice sort of like large area of coverage. And then the rest of the Fusiliers are all hanging out sort of like back here, nice, not clumped, nicely deployed, etc. Back behind this building are the Denabris and the guided missile remote. And then on this building here, we have the Beast Hunter, the Kahu. The Kahu is not looking in this direction. Instead, it's got a cross-map fire. Basically, it's watching that position there. The Beast Hunter's mine is there, and then the Bulletier is there. So I'm presented with this, and my worst nightmares have come to pass, which is that there are 2 high-quality MSV2 AROs. And I have to figure out what to do about this. I have reserved 2 Caledonians in the hopes of basically aggressively pushing. Now, the good news is I think I've got an opening up this flank. So I put the second Caledonian here. So we have one Caledonian from each combat group on this flank, ready to attack in this direction. The other one, I make the ballsy call and I push it into this corner here. It's going to impetuous over this barricade, and in doing so, it will be exposed to a shot from the Kahu at like probably 40 something inches, which I'm just hoping to survive and make the breakthrough and then get up onto this rooftop. I don't love taking that ARO, but if anyone can survive that, it's a dog warrior. For my opponent's part, he reserve drops a Peacemaker here, and then an Oxbot there, because he really wants an Oxbot watching this objective, and the Peacemaker is kind of watching into this alleyway. So just in a little more detail, here is this 4-man link team, and then these are my 3D printed mecha dog warriors. Basically, they're just useful silhouette 6 models. I'm never going to have a proper Ariadne army. I don't have the wherewithal to paint or collect it, so I've leaned into kind of like a Ariadne rules for tech looking profiles. Sometimes these guys are bears, sometimes they're dog warriors. I have 3 of them, and so they're dog warriors in this particular case. They're all Caledonians. It's not too confusing to play with. Here's the second link team, SAS there. I love this table, by the way. I've mentioned this table before, but all of these red elements are interactable. So for example, this doorway here leads up to this doorway there. The players can nice and easily see that. If you use a short skill while you're at one doorway, you move to the other. And then here is my other link team. So heavy infantry, every heavy infantry on the board is a Highlander Grey. If it has a HMG, it's a HMG. Pretty straightforward. Here we can see the line and or the Hideout's deployment. So there's a Varangian hanging out there. This is the Guilang, this is the Hacker, and we can see that the Hideout has like a nice sort of like line onto, in particular, here is one of the consoles in the distance. And then here is the Kahu, and he's got some real good lines of fire. There's a line down there, and there's a line down there, and he's got nice long range. It is going to be a huge pain in the ass to try and engage him with a HMG. And in fact, I think in this picture, yeah, I've got like a HMG hanging out back here somewhere. He is not going to be game to engage that Kahu. That is probably going to be at something like 37 to 38 inches. So this is a very lovely position. And then we have the Beast Hunter watching in this direction with its mine on the table on the ground down here. So overall, the Kaplan, although you can't see it, is hanging out down there. Overall, really like this deployment. Nevertheless, the aim of the game for me is aggression, and so aggressive we are going to be. I actually realized that I think I want to change my combat group slot at the end of the game, and I moved the Katyusha into Group 2, because it's actually pretty important that Group 2 has orders, and this is a change I would make to the list, I think, permanently. So spend 1 command token, but that's fine, you have plenty, you're playing Walrus. And we will use all of our impetuous orders. On this flank here, the first of the two, the Group 1 Cameronian, will run up here, it will engage the Peacemaker. I will get wounded, but I will destroy the Peacemaker in the process, and then the second Cameronian will just yeet forward with that obstacle cleared. So we end up with the first Cameronian actually guts his prone, takes its shotgun hit, guts his prone there. Second Cameronian ends up basically a long way up the table at the end of the first order. The other Cameronian in Group 2 vaults across this. I think it might actually have to use Super Jump in order to get past. And it cops a Kahu ARO at, I think, 41 inches. It dodges, fails the dodge, Kahu hits once, I take 1 wound, and I guts forward out of line of sight. Would really have liked to have passed a second armor, or passed the armor save, or had the Kahu miss there, but it was firing 2 shots. And ultimately, something I found over this game is that if you take 3 Cameronians, you are going to be about average on their armor rolls. And actually, it turns out that if you are about average on Cameronian armor rolls, Cameronians are really, really good. So we've pushed through the initial cordon and we just immediately start attacking things. This dog warrior has gotten all the way up to here, and it has, I think it takes 1, I do 1 coordinated order now just to move things around, and that immediately puts this Cameronian in a position where it can super jump up to there, it can avoid both the Kahu and the Hideout, and it can see the Hacker and the camouflage marker. It gets spotlit doing this, but it fires its chain rifle, and the Fusilier shoots back and kills it, but I put down both the Guilang and the Fusilier, which, given that has cost me exactly 1 regular order to do, excellent trade. Guilang's down. Guilang is an overcosted piece of crap, but it's 27 points, and so I've killed it and the Hacker, so very good trade for this Cameronian. Thumbs up, on to the next. So with this Peacemaker having been destroyed, we now get this Cameronian around here. We only have so many orders. We're going to jump up to here, and we're going to put a Chain Rifle into the Beast Hunter and the Peacemaker with a shotgun. Peacemaker with a shotgun shoots because I've been spotlit, so it's firing on 21s, and the Beast Hunter flamethrowers. I whoosh back with the chain rifles, and I hit both of them twice. The Beast Hunter goes unconscious, but the the bulleteer spangs both of its saves, hits me, and I fail one of my 3 saves. I guts prone, so I'm sitting on this rooftop. Basically, I am now your problem. And that's most of what Group 2 does. I have, like, 2 orders left that I can do things with, and I use them to spec fire. I spec fire onto the rooftop a couple of times and onto the bulleteer. All I succeed in doing is killing this mine. The bulleteer passes a 3rd armor roll, but it felt like a pretty, like, always spec fire with Cameronians if you get a chance and you have the orders to use. It's just ultimately, it's low risk and efficient because their fizz is so high. They're rolling on 13s with enemy rolling -3 dodges. It's just that this Peacemaker passed yet another armor roll. But that ultimately is a very good result from the second combat group. The first combat group is actually not going to do quite as much. I have to press some buttons, and I would like to clear some of the big guns. So this team on the rooftop here has to move anyway. So they move a little bit, and the Highlander Grey pops up here and pops up here, and then moves forward to fight the Hideout. And I am 5 dice on 13s, the Hideout is 2 dice on 14s, and it crits me, and I go dogged, then I fight it again, and it's inconclusive, then I fight it again, and it's inconclusive, then I fight it again, and I put it down. So not a perfect outcome, but ultimately I am a 28-point HMG piece. It is what it is. So we then pull back around this way, and we slide up here to fight the Kahu, and we have a big brute gunfight. And because I am dogged, my opponent is like, he loses the face-to-face roll, but he passes his armor roll, and he's just like, yeah, that's fine. You know what? Wasted your time. Kahu goes prone. Kahu wants to live. And so I have a few orders left at this point, and so Isabella is going to hop down the stairs, and she's going to activate this console. I will not really have the orders to activate the second one, but I have my first one done, and we do a bit of repositioning. And that is broadly that's a pretty good turn. Some things could have gone a little better, but I have killed 4 pieces. I've killed, technically 5 if you count the mine, but I've killed a Beast Hunter, the Hideout, a Fusilier, and a Guilang, a 5, sorry, and a Peacemaker. 5 kills on the first turn is pretty good, and it could have been better. Like, if either of the 2 spec fires had gone through, or the Bulleteer hadn't passed 3 armor rolls, that would have been 6 kills on the first turn with those Dog Warriors. Now, those are not kills for nothing, because I have multiple wounded, I have no Dog Warriors that aren't wounded, and 1 Dog Warrior is dead. So there is a cost there. There is a cost to those attacks, and those pieces cost 20 points. And I am down the 28-point HMG. So I am down 2 pieces, 2 expensive regular pieces, which means killing 5 or 6 things is not, like, it's not as good as it sounds, because I have taken casualties myself to make those attacks. But it's still a pretty good first turn. So here's how things look at the end of that turn. We can see that Isabella McGregor has moved up to here. We have prone Dog Warrior, unconscious Dog Warrior. This Link team has not moved. Walrus has not, I think he might have relocated slightly, but he's basically in the same spot. And one objective has been pressed. My opponent now responds by bringing on an airborne trooper, and I pretty much knew that there would have to be something in the wings that was hidden, and I assumed a Tiger Soldier. I just kind of hoped it didn't exist, but I was pretty sure it had to exist. He's going to set the stage for that by having this Varangian Impetuous. It's going to fail to throw smoke, but then it will move and succeed. It will get some smoke down there, and it will move around here, and it will get some smoke down like this. And that will clear off, basically, it will cover my SAS in this corner here. So pretty much like all of this space is smoked out, which lets the Tiger Soldier just go whoop and land there. This is a designated landing area scenario, so the Tiger Soldier lands on 15s, and it does, and it just pops down, lead as you like, right there. It gets spotlit in the process by the War Driver, and then it comes around here. The Varangian moves up here. It gets spotlit as well, moves around this corner, has an inconclusive, is running out of orders at this point, because again, I did kill 5 things. We get a dodge on this guy that moves him back, but eventually he's going to be declared, he's going to be made dogged, and then the Tiger Soldier will come around here. We'll kill him, move around the corner, and trade shotgun for combi rifle, and it will survive the boarding shotgun, and it will kill the War Driver. So in terms of counterattacks, that's pretty savage, because my opponent, although he only killed 2 things, he killed a War Driver and he killed the second of my 2 HMGs, he did so without taking any casualties, which is a pain. That's a very effective turn. He has equalized the sort of like scenario position, where we each now have 1 button pressed, and he did it all very neatly. Tiger Soldiers are good, you guys. Tiger Soldiers are excellent. Now, he was probably hoping for more, but to be honest, he's got these 2 pieces killed, he's got 1 Dog Warrior killed, he's got my Highlander Grey on this flank killed. Oh, and he puts down my Paramedic with the Tiger Soldier. So I'm now down 5 things to his 5 things, which means that the attrition situation is surprisingly even going into turn 2. That's an excellent rejoinder, like really good play with that Tiger Soldier. Drop troops are sometimes inconsistent, but oft like when they get a chance to really strut, Tiger Soldiers are a really good one. So we then roll to land, so Skyfall then occurs. We roll to land the Panoplies with 4 of them landing. And perhaps unsurprisingly, given that we have exactly even odds on these rolls, because we each have 1 console pressed and we each have our landing operative alive, we each get to choose where 2 of them go. And so for my opponent, 1 of them will end up basically back here, and 1 of them will end up back there. That's fine. And for me, 1 of them is going to try and land on the Tiger Soldier, but it passes its dodge. So I have 1 back here, and I have the other one back there. And this is basically pretty even. I was worried that we would end up in situations with the objectives like really like wrestled far back, maybe in situations where it would be impossible to contest. But I've moved my troops forward. I've put the zones. I've put the panoplies in places where I'm probably going to want to go, and my opponent has kind of done the same. I don't feel like either of these. There's 8 inches between these two, by the way, in accordance with the scenario. I don't feel like any of these have ended up in a particularly bad situation, and if they had, maybe my opponent would have gotten really lucky, but more likely it was because they had successfully contested the scenario early on. So here's that game state. You can actually see the panoplies in place now, and we are heading into my second turn. So I still have 2 Cameronians left alive, can't stop, won't stop, over they're going to go. This one runs into close combat with a Bulleteer, and this time the Bulleteer does not make its armor roll, but I do, and we put it down. And the other one follows up and jumps up onto this rooftop. And then we do a couple of things, actually. But the first thing that we do is we fire the missiles. It is wonderful to get guided missile kills as Caledonia, and you will see there are 2 Spotlit troopers, a Tiger Soldier and a Varangian Guard. And this little Katyusha back here kills both of them. 2 orders, clean as you like, dead Varangian, dead Tiger Soldier. What a ripper. That brought joy. That was absolutely wonderful. I otherwise don't have a ton of orders, and we're going to be pretty aggressive with this target. These Cameronians. They're going to push around into this flank, and they're basically going to finish off both the Kahu and the Kaplan Doctor and bust this open. I do a little bit more moving, and then I stop and I do a little bit of counting because I should do some math at this stage of the game, because we've killed a whole bunch more things this turn, and we need to just see what my opponent has left. And what my opponent has left is a Clipper-guided missile and a Denavus back here, and 3 Fusiliers. And that's it. And that's not a lot of things. In fact, that's about 70 points worth of troops. I have a very small number of orders left in this turn, having just made the realization that the game is about to end because of retreat, and so we basically, like panic stations, deal with things. Walrus makes the run around to here to stand on this objective. He's 6'4", so he's able to do that, and this link team splits. So we have the Highlander Grey here. He runs back there. It takes him 2 orders to run back there, stand on this panoply and open it and pull out a HMG. Would have loved that before. And Isabel McGregor basically moves forward to stand. And she stands in this position here, where she has kind of like overwatch over a lot of my opponent's position. And my opponent then begins his turn. He's in Loss of Lieutenant because retreat entails Loss of Lieutenant, and most of his models don't have courage, and he has 2 command tokens. So all he can really do is he makes 1 Fusilier regular so that it can run back to this objective and hold it, and then he activates the Clipper with its irregular order. It has courage, moves around to there, then he converts 1 order irregular order regular, and it runs over to this objective, and Isabel McGregor shoots it to death. I didn't cover this before, but previous in the game I did do my Classified, which was in Extremis Recovery. One of the Cameronians did that last turn. And so that's the game. That's it. We end there because scenario ends in retreat. So in terms of scoring, my opponent has 1 objective. I have 2, so that's 1 point each for each of those. So that's right now, that's 1 for my opponent and 2 for me. And then I also have 2 for controlling more than my opponent, and 1 for having more things pulled out of panoplies, and 1 for doing my Classified. So the final score is 1 to 6, and that's the game. That's the end of Skyfall. So overall thoughts, I really liked this scenario. There are some things I would tinker with and change, because right now it has a lot of what you'd call like homebrew. It's got the fingerprints of homebrew on it. Things like for example, something I would change is the landing operative has to be a hacker or an engineer, but can't be a killer hacker. Just make that consistent with every single other ITS scenario where you choose a model to be something, consistent with Master Breacher, consistent with Key Ops, just use that definition. I know it's thematic to have it be a hacker or an engineer, but it is easier on players to make it something that they are familiar with how that works. And the thing with, particularly the thing with homebrew scenarios, is that you have one chance to teach this to most players. They're not going to play this scenario many, many times. They're going to play this probably once. And because they're going to play it once, you have to slim everything down and make it as simple and intuitive and consistent with other stuff as possible. The only other changes that I would make, one that we did, is we chose to play this scenario as not requiring you to both activate and control the consoles in order to get the bonus from those. And the reason for that is that we are not using 3D consoles, which means that they aren't objects, they don't provide cover, which means they're fucking death traps. If you try and control those things at the end of turn 1, you're just going to lose troopers. So we chose to make it activate, which my opponent activated 1, I activated 1, felt that worked much better, and I think activate kind of just works better in general. Asking someone to control a console at the end of turn 1 is asking them to lose troops, because you can't just yeet things into the midfield and expect them to reliably survive. So that is a change that we did make and which I would make in future. And then the final change that I would consider is right now how the combat drop for the panoplies works is they drop on Fizz 10. And it isn't clear in the scenario if the designated landing area applies for that, but rules is written it doesn't, because designated landing area applies to troopers that are landing during using combat jump. I would actually probably increase the panoplies from having a base fizz of 10 when they land to a fizz of 14 and make the landing area rule apply. So that means they're starting on a 17 up to a 20 if you have your landing officer alive, which means that seizing even one one antenna puts you up to 23. And the reason why I think you should do this is that you want to really motivate players to fight over those antennas early on. And just changing the face-to-face math from like Fizz 13 to Fizz 16 or Fizz 16 to Fizz 19 it's not that significant if it's close. It really is just kind of like lap of the gods. You'll probably win half of them. Your opponent probably win half of them, probably. But it doesn't. There's not actually a huge incentive. Like if I think there's a good attack run, I might just ignore the antennas in this scenario, which is good that that's a viable option, but I think you do want to push people towards interacting with them. And if you can push your landing score, your face-to-face roll, up to a bigger than 20 number, then you start getting positive modifiers to your dice roll. And those really, really matter. If you've ever had like a CC23 versus CC20 fight, you know that it could go either way, but it's significant advantage to the CC23. And so I think just changing the math to incentivize the antennas being like that little bit more important, if you can really like seize control of things, I think would probably be good. But otherwise, this is a scenario that accomplishes some goals that otherwise are very, very difficult. Like having player placeable objectives and multi-phase scenario play is incredibly difficult. Like the ITS pack has tried it, and I like Mind Wipe, for example. I think it's a really cool scenario, but even that has been pretty hesitant with making multi-phase scenario play. Like, and it has emergent, like you never know exactly which objective you have to go after in Mind Wipe, but you have some idea of what you need to go. Actually risking like player placed objectives, it's difficult to pull it off in a remotely balanced way. And one game, at least with this scenario, it felt pretty good. It's a real success. So if this scenario ended up like in the ITS pack, I would be pretty okay with that. Like with some tweaks to pull it to ITSify it, basically. I would play this scenario again. It was fun. I'm going to try and get like a Nomad player of my acquaintance to try this out, because I would be interested to see how he approaches it in terms of like getting the panoplies behind his lines and then erecting a Nomad style defense. That would be really, really cool. So yeah, again, that's the conclusion of this game. 6-1 win to Caledonia. Nice outing, I think, for the Caledonians, despite the matchup on paper being pretty rough. This is a bit of an example of how you can push through good MSV Overwatch, even with an army like Caledonians, where 8 of models in your lists are smoke throwers. As a reminder, this was played as part of the Operation Hungry Walrus fan-made global campaign. I will put a link to that in the video description, and otherwise, as always, I will see you next time.